At 6:42 a.m. on a Tuesday, the sound of plastic shattering against asphalt yanked me out of bed faster than any alarm clock ever could. It was sharp, ugly, and unmistakable, my trash can once again reduced to roadkill under the pearl-white Escalade that tore down our cul-de-sac like it was a demolition derby track. For a split second, I thought I was dreaming. Then I opened the curtains and saw the glittering shards of black plastic scattered across my driveway, my garbage strewn like confetti, and Karen, our self-appointed HOA queen, slamming her SUV into reverse as if nothing had happened. I swear I could still hear the scrape of her bumper against the curb as she sped off, leaving me staring at a mess that had become sickeningly familiar. By my count, this was the 57th time. I didn't exaggerate. I had a spreadsheet, videos, even timestamp. At first, I thought maybe it was clumsiness. SUVs are big, driveways are narrow. But you don't, accidentally, back into the same spot 57 times unless you're doing it on purpose, and Karen was nothing if not purposeful. She carried that HOA binder like a scepter, barking at neighbors about mailbox heights, lawn lengths, and the audacity of anyone daring to leave a garden hose visible from the street. My trash can wasn't just a bin to her, it was a symbol. In her mind, it sat too close to the road, too casual, too imperfect for the step-forward illusion she wanted our neighborhood to project. And in her world, symbols had to be destroyed. I stood barefoot in my driveway, sipping cold coffee, looking at the wreckage like a crime scene detective. Bags of eggshells, coffee grounds, and yesterday's pizza crust oozed across the concrete. I could already imagine the HOA letter I'd get next week about unsanitary property conditions, likely written by the very same woman who created them. The absurdity would have been funny if it wasn't so damned exhausting. My wife had begged me not to escalate. "She'll calm down," she'd said. "Just move the bin farther in." I tried that. Then she hit the mailbox. After that, the corner of my flower bed. The more I yielded, the bolder she became. That morning, watching ants swarm my shredded garbage bag, I realized something important. Karen didn't want compromise. She wanted control. And people like that only learned one way, through consequences. The problem with consequences is that they require patience. You can't just slap duct tape on a trash can and hope it survives. You have to build something better, stronger, unexpected. I spent that week researching materials between work calls, scrolling forums filled with contractors and DIY fanatics. I learned more about reinforced concrete, aggregate mixes, and steel molds than I ever thought I'd care to know. My garage slowly transformed into a workshop of silent rebellion. Where most people stacked boxes or bikes, I stacked bags of Quikrete, rebar rods, and plywood panels. The air smelled like dust and defiance. Every night, I worked under the buzz of a single fluorescent bulb, pouring, shaping, smoothing. Neighbors would peek in, curious, but I brushed them off with vague answers about repairs. I wanted Karen to have no clue what was coming. Revenge, after all, works best when it's disguised as normal life. By Friday, my masterpiece was ready. A trash can molded from reinforced concrete, lined with a removable plastic barrel inside so I could actually use it. From the outside, it looked like any other black bin, except it weighed close to 400 pounds. I nearly threw my back out rolling it to the curb for its first debut. But oh, was it worth it? Saturday morning arrived like Christmas. I sat on the porch, coffee steaming, pretending to read the paper while keeping one eye on the street. Karen's Escalade appeared right on schedule, engine growling, chrome grille glinting in the sun. She slowed near my driveway, her familiar ritual beginning. I swear she smirked as she angled the SUV, as if relishing another easy kill. Only this time, when her bumper connected, the world didn't sound like snapping plastic. It sounded like thunder. The Escalade jolted violently, metal crunching against immovable stone. Her hood crumpled inward like an accordion. Airbags burst from her dashboard in a puff of white. The concrete can didn't so much as budge an inch. I couldn't stop the laugh that burst out of me. It was sharp, loud, maybe a little unhinged. Karen sat frozen behind the wheel, face pale, staring at the deployed airbags like they had betrayed her. Then she turned, locked eyes with me on the porch, and for the first time since I'd moved into this neighborhood, she looked small. Shaken. Her perfect suburban empire had just slammed headfirst into reality, and reality didn't care about HOA bylaws. Neighbors spilled out of their houses, drawn by the crash. Phones appeared. Pictures snapped. I stayed calm, sipping my coffee like I'd been expecting the morning show. Karen fumbled out of her SUV, shouting about how I had sabotaged her, how the trash can was illegal, how she'd sue me for damages. But her words fell flat against the undeniable image of a perfectly parked bin and a very wrecked luxury SUV. Someone laughed. Someone else clapped. For once, I wasn't the one being judged. What Karen didn't know yet was that this crash was only the beginning. Because as the tow truck dragged away her mangled Escalade that afternoon, I received an anonymous tip about a different kind of wreck, financial, not mechanical. And it tied directly back to her role as HOA treasurer. By the time I opened the email, the real war had only just begun. By the time Karen's Escalade was hauled away on the flatbed, the neighborhood was buzzing like it had just witnessed a reality TV finale. People were still lingering in their driveways, whispering, shaking their heads, or just plain grinning. A few came up to me directly, offering congratulations as if I'd planned the whole spectacle for their entertainment. One guy even joked about starting a betting pool on whether she'd hit it again after buying a new car. I smiled politely, but inside I wasn't celebrating yet. The crash had been satisfying, yes, but I knew Karen. She wasn't the type to lick her wounds and move on. No, she was the type to double down, to find new angles of attack. And sure enough, less than an hour after the tow truck disappeared, I heard the sharp rap of knuckles on my front door. Karen stood there, arms crossed, wearing oversized sunglasses that couldn't quite hide the swelling redness on her cheeks from the airbag. She didn't bother with small talk. "You think you're clever?" she snapped. "You deliberately installed an unsafe obstruction. That thing is a public hazard. My lawyer will be in touch." I leaned against the doorway, keeping my tone calm, almost bored. "It's a trash can, Karen. The city issued it to me. I just reinforced it. Nothing illegal about that." Her jaw tightened, lips pressed into a thin line. "You'll regret this," she said, and turned on her heel. And that's when I knew. The real game had started. Over the next week, a steady stream of HOA notices appeared in my mailbox. One accused me of improper waste receptacle placement. Another claimed my modifications to city-issued property violated unspecified safety code. A third threatened fines if I didn't restore compliance. Each letter bore Karen's telltale signature flourish, a looping K that looked like it belonged on a kindergarten worksheet. I filed them neatly into a folder, careful not to react. Because here's the thing about bullies. They feed on confrontation. But silence? Silence unnerves them. Meanwhile, the anonymous email I'd received after the crash gnawed at the back of my mind. The subject line had been simple: "Check the books." Attached was a single PDF containing what looked like a spreadsheet of HOA expenses: landscaping, maintenance, utilities. At first glance, it was boring as oatmeal. But after the fifth line item 4, consulting services, at suspiciously round figures, always $2,000, $3,000, never a cent more or less, I realized something was off. I cross-referenced it with past HOA meeting minutes available online, and sure enough, those expenses had never been discussed or approved. Someone was siphoning money. And given Karen's position as treasurer, I had a good guess who. Still, suspicion wasn't proof. I needed something stronger. So I did what any mildly tech-savvy neighbor with too much free time would do. I started digging. Public records, property tax databases, even LinkedIn connections. And slowly, a pattern emerged. Karen's husband, who rarely showed his face in the neighborhood, owned a tiny LLC registered to a P.O. box in the next town over. Guess who was receiving thousands in consulting fees? The discovery filled me with a kind of cold electricity. It wasn't just about my trash can anymore. Karen had been using the HOA not as a neighborhood improvement tool but as her personal ATM. And the arrogance of it all, destroying my property while funding her lifestyle with our dues, was almost poetic in its stupidity. But I couldn't just waltz into the next meeting and accuse her. That would backfire, especially since she had allies on the board who owed her favors or feared her wrath. No, I needed undeniable, irrefutable proof. And ideally, I needed her to hand it to me herself. My chance came faster than expected. A few days later, I got a knock on the door from James, one of the quieter board members. He looked nervous, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting Karen to leap out of the bushes. "Can we talk?" he asked. Inside, over coffee, he admitted he was fed up. "She bullies everyone," he said, voice low. "The fines, the threats, it's all her. I just go along because I don't want to be targeted." When I mentioned the suspicious financials, his eyes widened. "You noticed too? I thought I was crazy." He confessed he'd seen checks made out to her husband's LLC but was too afraid to say anything. That was the moment I realized I had an ally. Maybe even a whistleblower. Together, we hatched a plan. James would quietly slip me copies of board financial statements and invoices, while I compiled evidence into a tidy little package. In the meantime, I played the long game with Karen. Every time she sent a notice, I'd respond politely, asking for clarification, citing vague city ordinances, stretching the process out like taffy. My calm replies infuriated her, which was half the fun. Then came the HOA barbecue. Once a year, the neighborhood gathered in the park, everyone pretending we all liked each other. This time, Karen saw it as her stage to humiliate me. She cornered me near the grill, raising her voice so half the street could hear. "This man is endangering our community with his reckless behavior. He's defiant, disrespectful, and a liability." I let her rant, hands in my pockets, until the crowd grew visibly uncomfortable. Then I pulled out my phone, scrolled to the photo of her smashed Escalade crumpled against my concrete bin, and held it up. "Funny," I said. "The only danger I've seen is someone who can't keep her SUV out of people's property." 57 times, wasn't it? The murmur that rippled through the crowd was delicious. Karen sputtered, tried to retort, but the image spoke louder than her words. People laughed. She stormed off in a huff, plate of potato salad abandoned on the grass. That night James texted me, "She's furious. Be ready." And ready I was. Because while Karen thought this was still about a trash can, I was assembling a case that could not only topple her from her HOA throne but also expose her as a fraud. She'd drawn the battle lines herself, and now I intended to end the war on my terms. But fate, as it often does, had a sense of humor. The next morning, a letter arrived in my mailbox, not from Karen, but from the county. It seemed a complaint had been filed against me for illegal construction of hazardous structures. Someone had escalated it beyond the HOA, and inspectors were scheduled to visit my property. Karen had upped the stakes. What she didn't realize was that in doing so, she'd opened a door I could walk right through. Because inspectors didn't just investigate one property. They often looked at the whole street. And Karen's books, her landscaping deals, even her own renovations, were about to get very, very interesting. The county inspectors showed up on a bright Tuesday morning, 2 of them in khaki uniforms and steel-toed boots, clipboards in hand. They were the sort of men who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, the kind who dealt with angry homeowners daily and learned to hide behind bureaucratic neutrality. I greeted them calmly, offered water, and showed them the infamous concrete trash can as though I were unveiling a museum piece. One crouched down, tapped the surface with his knuckles, raised his eyebrows and muttered, "Well, that's not going anywhere." Karen was already outside, of course. She'd parked herself across the street on her lawn chair, sunglasses on, phone in hand, recording every second like she was filming a documentary. She barked from behind her camera, "See? Hazardous. It's a public danger. Someone could get hurt." The inspectors glanced at her, then back at me. I kept my voice measured. "It's just reinforced. The interior is removable plastic. Perfectly functional, perfectly safe. In fact, it prevents garbage from spilling across the street, which has been a recurring issue here." I didn't need to look at her to feel her face heating up. After 30 minutes of measuring, photographing, and scribbling, the inspectors concluded the worst thing I might be guilty of was over-engineering. Their official line: "No violation, no citation." Karen nearly choked on her outrage. She stormed over mid-sentence, waving her phone like a weapon. "This is corruption. He paid you off. You're ignoring the bylaws." The taller inspector sighed. "Ma'am, this is a county matter. HOAs don't dictate county code. If you have further concerns, you're welcome to pursue them in civil court." And just like that, they left, their truck rumbling down the street. Karen was left standing there, trembling with fury, her recording suddenly looking less like evidence and more like a tantrum reel. I gave her a polite little wave, then turned back to my driveway. Victory felt sweet, but I knew it was only round one. That night, James came over again, more nervous than usual. He dropped a stack of papers on my kitchen table. "She's digging in. Called an emergency board session tomorrow. Wants a vote to fine you for community disruption. But look at this." He pointed to the papers. I managed to grab copies of invoices she submitted last quarter. I flipped through them, each one more ridiculous than the last. Consulting fees from her husband's LLC. Emergency landscaping billed at double market rates. Even security monitoring 4 cameras that didn't exist. All rubber-stamped, all paid out of the HOA's reserve fund. It was blatant embezzlement disguised as busywork. "What happens if we bring this up at the meeting?" I asked. James shook his head. "She controls the board. They'll either ignore it or claim you fabricated it. She's already calling you the neighborhood anarchist." That's when an idea struck me. I didn't need the board to believe me. I needed the homeowners, the people who actually funded this circus, to see the truth. If I exposed her publicly, she'd lose the one thing she valued more than control: credibility. The next day's emergency board meeting was held in the clubhouse, a beige room with fluorescent lights that smelled faintly of chlorine from the pool outside. I arrived early, sitting near the back, folder of evidence neatly tucked under my arm. One by one, neighbors trickled in, drawn by the promise of drama. Karen sat at the front, binder stacked high, gavel in hand like she was a judge presiding over a courtroom. She opened the session with theatrical indignation. "This community is under threat," she declared, voice booming. "We have individuals who think they're above the rules, who build dangerous structures, who endanger property values. As HOA treasurer, I cannot stand by while one man's selfishness drags us all down." Murmurs filled the room. Some nodded along. Others just looked uncomfortable. Karen motioned to me. "Mr. Trash Can here has flaunted our bylaws repeatedly. I propose an immediate fine of $5,000 and mandatory removal of his so-called receptacle." I stood slowly, folder in hand. My voice stayed level, almost casual. "Funny you should bring up bylaws, Karen. Because I've been looking into some of our own financial records and I noticed a few interesting things. Care to explain why the HOA paid nearly $15,000 last year to your husband's consulting company?" The room went silent. Karen blinked, then forced a laugh. "That's a legitimate service contract. Completely above board." I flipped a page, held it up. "Really? Because this invoice here is dated on the same day he was photographed golfing at Pebble Beach. Not much consulting happening on the back nine, is there?" Gasps rippled through the audience. Karen's face flushed crimson. "That's irrelevant. You're deflecting from your violations." I kept going, page after page. Emergency landscaping fees for lawns that weren't touched. Security monitoring systems that don't exist. Thousands of dollars in administrative costs with no receipt. If I were a betting man, I'd say this looks less like community management and more like embezzlement. Someone shouted from the back, "Is that true?" Another muttered, "Where's my money going then?" The tide was shifting, and Karen knew it. She slammed her gavel, shouting, "Out of order! Out of order!" But the panic in her eyes betrayed her. I leaned forward, voice calm but sharp. "You've smashed my property 57 times, Karen. You've sent me letter after letter, tried to drag me through inspections, and now you want me fined for daring to stand up to you. But the truth is, the only danger in this community isn't a trash can. It's you." The room erupted in overlapping voices. Some demanded answers. Others demanded her resignation. Karen shouted over them, trying to regain control, but it was like trying to dam a flood with a paper cup. James quietly leaned toward me and whispered, "You've got her." By the end of the meeting, no vote had been taken. The board adjourned in chaos, homeowners buzzing with suspicion. Karen stormed out, her binder clutched like a life raft, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. I watched her go, knowing this wasn't over. People like her don't surrender, they retaliate. And retaliate she did. The very next morning, I woke to find my mailbox ripped off its post and lying in the middle of the street, tire marks skidding across my lawn. No witnesses, no cameras, though we all knew who had the motive. I sighed, snapped a photo, and filed a police report. Let her stew. The more desperate she became, the more reckless her behavior would get. Later that afternoon, I received another email from my anonymous source. This one was juicier. Copies of HOA bank statements showing transfers from the association's account directly into her husband's LLC. Not just once or twice, monthly like clockwork. The total over 2 years? $47,000. I sat back, staring at the numbers, adrenaline humming in my veins. It was ironclad. With this, I could bury her. But timing was everything. Drop it too soon, and she might wriggle free. Wait long enough, and I could let her dig her own grave. The only question left was how far she'd go before the neighborhood turned on her completely. And judging by the fresh scrape on her Escalade's replacement rental car, the answer was farther than anyone expected. The day Karen returned with her rental SUV, I knew she wasn't finished. The Escalade she'd wrecked was still sitting at the repair shop, and rumor had it the insurance company was dragging its feet after reviewing the photos neighbors had gleefully shared online. But Karen wasn't the type to slink away in embarrassment. No, she marched into battle with whatever weapon she had, whether it was a clipboard, a rental car, or pure spite. She began small, testing the waters. HOA newsletters suddenly brimmed with pointed reminders about unsightly modifications and community harmony. My trash can wasn't named directly, but everyone knew who the target was. Then came the door-to-door canvassing, her favorite sport. She'd knock on doors with her binder tucked under one arm, whispering about how I was bringing down property values and endangering the neighborhood children with my cement monstrosity. Some neighbors humored her, nodding politely, while others shut the door mid-sentence. I might have ignored it, but one evening, my wife came home visibly shaken. She'd run into Karen at the mailbox cluster, where Karen loudly announced, in front of 3 other neighbors, that people like us don't belong here, and that the board was working on removing us. That wasn't just pettiness, it was intimidation. And that meant it was time to escalate my own game. I called James. "It's time we show people what she's really doing," I said. He hesitated. "If we go public now, she'll go nuclear." "That's the point," I told him. "Let her bury herself." So we planned. The HOA had an annual audit requirement, but Karen had conveniently postponed it 2 years in a row, citing budget constraints. James and I drafted a petition demanding a special audit, gathering signatures from as many homeowners as possible. Within 3 days, we had half the neighborhood on board. People didn't like paying dues into a black hole, especially once whispers of embezzlement began to spread. When Karen caught wind of it, she confronted me in the middle of the street. I'll never forget the scene. Her in her oversized sunglasses, binder clutched like a shield, shrieking so loudly that curtains parted in nearby windows. "You're poisoning this community," she screamed. "You're a liar and a manipulator. You think you're clever, but you're just pathetic." I let her rant, then calmly said, "If you have nothing to hide, why fear an audit?" The silence that followed was deafening. Neighbors who'd gathered to watch began murmuring, exchanging looks. Karen sputtered, her face mottled red, before storming off to her rental, tires screeching as she tore down the street. That night, my phone buzzed with texts. "We're with you. She's lost it." About time someone stood up to her. The tide was turning. But Karen wasn't done. The next week, my wife and I woke up to find our lawn plastered with bright orange HOA violation notices. Dozens of them, taped to every tree, every fence post, even the concrete trash can itself. They cited nonsense like improper window coverings and grass height variance. One even claimed unauthorized holiday decorations, despite the fact it wasn't even close to a holiday. I took photos of every single notice, smiling as I documented them. Karen thought she was drowning me in paperwork, but really, she was building a mountain of evidence against herself. Harassment masquerading as compliance was still harassment. And harassment had legal consequences. The breaking point came at the next HOA board meeting. The clubhouse was packed wall to wall, tension humming in the air. Karen looked frazzled, her once perfect binder stuffed with loose papers, her hands trembling as she shuffled them. She opened with her usual theatrics, demanding order and insisting on fines against me. But when I raised my hand and asked to address the room, James backed me up, invoking the petition we'd filed. By HOA bylaws, a member in good standing had the right to speak. So I spoke. Calm, clear, and deliberate, I laid out the fact. The invoices to her husband's LLC. The inflated landscaping costs. The missing receipts. The bank transfers. And then I dropped the bomb. Copies of the HOA bank statements showing $47,000 siphoned into her family account. Gasps filled the room. Someone whispered, "That's theft." Another asked, "Isn't that a crime?" Karen's face twisted in panic. She stammered excuses, blaming clerical errors, blaming the accountant, even hinting that James and I had doctored the documents. But the harder she flailed, the more obvious her guilt became. Finally, in a move so desperate it bordered on surreal, she lunged across the table, trying to snatch the papers from my hands. Cameras caught everything. Half the room had their phones up, recording every wild gesture, every shriek. By the end of the meeting, the board couldn't ignore it anymore. A motion passed for an independent audit. Karen stormed out, but the damage was done. The whispers had become shouts. She wasn't the enforcer anymore, she was the suspect. That night, I sat on my porch, concrete trash can standing tall by my driveway like a monument. Neighbors strolled by, some stopping to clap me on the back, others offering bottles of beer in solidarity. For the first time since moving here, I felt something close to community. But in the back of my mind, I knew Karen wasn't finished. People like her don't fold quietly. They lash out, desperate to claw back control. And sure enough, my prediction came true less than 48 hours later. At 3 a.m, headlights cut across my living room curtains. I peered out to see Karen's rental SUV idling by my driveway. She got out, barefoot in her pajamas, clutching something metallic. A crowbar. My heart pounded as I watched her stagger toward the trash can, muttering under her breath. She raised the crowbar and swung. The metallic clang echoed through the night, but the concrete didn't so much as chip. She swung again and again, each blow weaker than the last, until she finally collapsed against it, sobbing. That was when my motion-activated floodlight clicked on. Bright white light washed over her, and she froze, deer in headlights. From my porch camera, I had the perfect angle. Her crouched on the curb, crowbar in hand, caught mid-vandalism. I didn't step outside. I didn't need to. She scrambled back to her rental, slammed the door, and sped off into the night. The next morning, I reviewed the footage. It was perfect. Time-stamped, crystal clear, undeniable. The HOA queen herself, reduced to a common vandal. And as I uploaded it to a neighborhood forum under the subject line, "Our Treasurer at Work," I realized something. The war wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every single neighbor she'd bullied, fined, or intimidated. And with one click, I'd given them all the ammunition they needed. The fallout was about to be spectacular. The video spread faster than I expected. By sunrise, half the neighborhood had seen it, and by noon, it had reached inboxes far beyond our cul-de-sac. The clip was short. Karen in her pajamas, hair wild, clutching a crowbar and hammering away at my concrete trash can under the glare of my floodlight, but it told a story that words never could. This wasn't an HOA treasurer enforcing community standard. This was a woman unraveling in real time, caught committing vandalism against the very property she claimed to protect. Neighbors began stopping by throughout the day, some with smirks, others openly laughing. "Looks like the Queen's lost her crown," one joked. Another said, "I always knew she'd crack." Even the ones who'd been loyal to her seemed shaken. Respect built on fear evaporates fast once people see the tyrant stumble. And Karen wasn't just stumbling, she was face-planting in spectacular fashion. By the afternoon, the board had called an emergency meeting. This time, it wasn't Karen at the head of the table. It was the HOA president, a man who usually avoided conflict like it was contagious. But the footage forced his hand. With homeowners practically demanding blood, he had no choice but to address the situation. I sat quietly in the back, listening, as the board debated suspension of Karen's duties pending the audit. She tried to defend herself, of course, claimed the video was deep-faked, claimed I was harassing her with surveillance, claimed she'd been checking the receptacle for safety violations. But no one bought it. Even her closest allies shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to tie themselves to a sinking ship. When the motion passed to strip her of treasurer responsibilities, Karen bolted from the room, binder clutched to her chest like it could still save her. The gavel hit the table. Just like that, her reign was over. Or so I thought. 2 days later, I came home to find a letter taped to my door. Not an official HOA notice, not county stationery, just a handwritten note in blocky, aggressive letters. It read, "You think you won. This isn't over." No signature, of course, but the handwriting was unmistakable. My wife panicked, worried about escalation. I stayed calm. Karen had already destroyed her credibility. Anything she did now only added to the pile of evidence against her. Still, I filed a police report, attaching the threatening note to the video and the photos of the destroyed mailbox. That was the final straw for law enforcement. Up until then, the cops had treated her antics as petty civil disputes, beneath their attention. But with the mounting evidence, financial records, vandalism caught on tape, and now a direct threat, they began to take her seriously. The officer who took my statement nodded grimly. "She's digging herself into a hole. Let us handle it." Meanwhile, the audit results trickled in. And they were worse than anyone imagined. Karen hadn't just siphoned a few thousand here and there. Over the past 3 years, she'd funneled nearly $47,000 into her husband's shell company, patted another $20,000 in miscellaneous expenses, and paid herself stipends under the guise of administrative fees. The grand total of unaccounted for funds? Almost $70,000. The board convened another meeting, this time with a county official present. I sat in the back again, watching the dominoes fall. The official laid out the findings in blunt terms: misappropriation of funds, possible fraud, potential criminal charges. Karen tried to interrupt, waving her binder like a magic wand, but the official cut her off. Ms. Fletcher, the evidence speaks for itself. You'll be contacted by investigators. The room buzzed with shock, anger, and, if I'm honest, satisfaction. Neighbors who'd been fined for ridiculous infractions, who'd lived in fear of her clipboard crusades, finally saw justice. Some wanted her removed from the community entirely. Others wanted restitution. But one thing was clear: she was finished. The final act came a week later. I was on my porch, sipping coffee beside my concrete trash can, still standing tall, unscathed, when a moving truck pulled onto Karen's driveway. 4 hours, workers loaded boxes, furniture, and those ridiculous garden gnomes she used to brag about importing from Europe. She stood on the lawn, barking orders, sunglasses hiding her face. But she looked smaller somehow, diminished. Neighbors watched from their windows, some openly waving goodbye, others shaking their heads. When the Escalade finally arrived on a tow truck, repaired but scarred, it felt poetic. She climbed inside, slammed the door, and drove off without so much as a glance back. The moving truck followed. Just like that, the woman who had terrorized our street for years was gone. The HOA elected a new treasurer within the month, someone competent, someone normal. The audit led to a lawsuit to recover stolen funds, and though it would take time, the community began to heal. People planted flowers, painted fences, hosted barbecues without fear of citations. The neighborhood actually felt like a neighborhood again. As for me, my concrete trash can remain right where I'd placed it, a monument to stubbornness, patience, and the power of playing the long game. Some evenings, I'd catch neighbors pointing it out to guests, telling the story with laughter in their voices. "That's the can that totaled Karen's Escalade," they'd say. "That's where it all started." But for me, it wasn't just about revenge. It was about standing my ground. About proving that bullies, no matter how loud, entitled, or well-armed with clipboards, can be outsmarted, outlasted, and, sometimes, undone by nothing more than concrete evidence. In the end, Karen's empire crumbled not because I shouted louder, but because I stayed calm, documented everything, and let her dig her own grave. And every morning, as I roll that 400-pound bin to the curb, I can't help but smile. Because while garbage still leaves my house once a week, the biggest piece of trash in our neighborhood finally left for good.